AutoNetwork Reports. I'm your host, Roosevelt, and we will take you inside the auto industry. Like I used to say, like never before. I'm going to have to change that after about 25 years of saying the same thing. Today, I want to welcome special guest hanging out somewhere out in the Midwest. I think it's Des Moines, Mr. Ken Chester, the
Woohoo!
host of the Tech Mobility Show, talk show. And we have our regular panelists. We have Mr. Chris Lawrence hanging out in Atlanta, Tia in somewhere in Texas. I never can remember. Mesquite, something like that.
Yes.
Mosquito. And Dawn is hanging out down there with the rich folk in
Woohoo!
Florida.
I'm the only broke one down here.
All the retired people in Florida. But as always, you can find us on blackpressusa.com. We provide all the automotive content for that newspaper digital website. And if you know an African American male that's 30 years or older, please make sure he visits his urologist and get that PSA exam. I always say it's that little prick that could possibly save his life. We have some movement in the industry. A friend, I would call her a friend of mine. She was with Toyota, Lisa Matarazzo. Yeah, we have you humming back there, girl. Mute yourself. That background noise is just. But anyway, as I was saying, Lisa Matarazzo was the chief marketing officer at Toyota for quite a while. And Ford snatched her, and I mean quick, because when the announcement came out, they said it was effective immediately. So Lisa has now moved over to Ford, and she'll be doing some work with Lincoln as well as motorsports. So hopefully I'll see Lisa on the road. I sent her a congratulation note. Great lady, nice person to know in the industry. We have today Mr. Ken Chester hanging out in Des Moines, Iowa. Ken goes, well, he's been in the industry, covering the industry for quite a while, on the newspaper side a lot. But before I try and mess up all of Ken's accolades, I'll let him talk about himself. Ken, talk a little bit about
Oh my God.
you, your experience, and then we'll get into what you're doing now with the Tech Mobility Show.
Okay, well, we'll keep it short. I've been in media, in automotive media, probably close to 30 years. Well, 30, almost 35 years, actually. Started here in Des Moines, actually started a purchase consulting business before I rolled into media back in the early 1990s. Wrote for my local newspaper, created a national news service, transitioned to radio in the last 10 years. Have branded twice, rebranded the show and the content back in March. And now we're known as Tech Mobility Productions, the Tech Mobility Show, Tech Mobility Podcast, Tech Mobility Topics. We talk about all things that move, basically at the intersection of technology and mobility, as I like to call it. And that's the quick version. But yeah, I've covered a lot of ground.
Now, prior to your show being called the Tech Mobility, what was it called?
It was called Roadworthy Drive.
Right.
Yeah. And the reason why we changed it primarily is because a lot of people assumed that vehicles was the only thing I talked about, which is not true. It's probably about 40% of what I talk about. I talk about all sorts of things. We've talked about privacy issues, security issues, radio GPT, chat GPT, alternative fuels, trucks, trains, cargo boats powered by methane, trucking, everything from truck trafficking to you name it. It's on the table.
Yeah, you go deep in some of your shows because, like, I'll watch and I'm like, wow, this is impressive. Like, you talk about things that I would have never thought about.
Well, and that's the point, because there is a lot of topics that don't get talked about. To be honest, to be blunt, members of the panel, probably each of us know at least 10 to 20 people who write about vehicles, at least. Probably in Tia's case, she knows hundreds, but the rest of us, maybe 10 to 20. What I talk about, what I like to talk about, is everything else that the average person needs to know, should know, need to be made aware of, but not not connected to. For example, how climate change is screwing up cargo transportation in the Panama Canal right now, how that's going to impact everybody. We've been warning people for years about what's going on in the Colorado River, to a lesser extent, what's going on in the Mississippi River, all transportation, all cargo transportation, and it impacts everybody's pocketbook in the end. And that's what I like to make people aware of, so they can get an understanding.
When I think I heard the term mobility maybe 5, 6 years ago, maybe it was a little longer, Ken, when I think LA, wasn't it LA the first one that came out and changed that show's name to something mobility?
They did, and then Detroit followed.
Right.
But you need to go back about 7 or 8 years. And honestly, BMW and Ford actually led the way when they said about 2015 that our model of selling vehicles to private individuals, the model that sustained us, made our billions and trillions for the last 100+ years, was no longer sustainable. BMW said it first, Ford said it not long after. They pivoted towards mobility. And up till that time, mobility, as it was defined in the industry, meant accessibility for physically challenged folk. That meaning has changed, dramatically changed. And it has a much broader definition now. And it pretty much means getting from point A to point B by any means possible. And there's a lot of different means out there that are still being discovered and people are still learning about.
Now, you don't think that you've gone a little too wide with mobility when you start talking about the Panama Canal?
No, because let's take a step. We are all consumers. We are all impacted by the movement of cargo around this global world. And honestly, according to the Panama Now Authority, they say they move 45 to 55% of all the cargo between the coasts that come from Asia. Which means if you've got a problem down there, you're going to have a problem as a consumer at some point from a shipment halfway around the world. That is the world we're in. And that impacts everything. If you've got a problem with the cargo ships, you've got a problem with the port. Now you've got a problem with trucking and railroads. That means you've got a retail problem, whether you get it from Amazon, whether you get it from your local grocery store, or however you get it. So it adds up real fast. And as a consumer, you should know why this is happening. And people need to understand the greater impact of climate change. They want to think, oh, well, it's global warming and it doesn't impact me. More than you know. Give you this little fun fact. Every time a ship goes through the locks at the Panama Canal, they lose 120 million gallons of water. And the Panama Canal is special in that it's fresh water that powers the canal and not salt water. And they're the only lock system that's like that between the oceans. So when they have a drought, that impacts them. And they're already under restrictions in terms of how many containers they can handle. The good news is they've got a railroad next to it. And the railroad volume's up 20%. But the Panama Canal Railroad can't absorb all the restriction that is being caused trying to get ships through the canal. And right now, according to what I just read, there is a backlog of 200 ships trying to get through the Panama Canal. 200 container ships right now.
You know, you're talking about impact. Give me your impressions of what we're seeing now with everybody wanting to focus on EVs, electric cars in the industry. What impact are you seeing in the industry by all the manufacturers basically saying we're going to have EVs, and some saying we're only going to make EVs in the future?
Oh my. This is what I talk about almost every week on my show.
Should be an easy one then.
Here's the bottom line. We got to do something about climate change. The EPA is giving it a healthy nudge. And for once, federal legislation is actually having the intended consequences that it's designed, moving production and building a supply chain in the United States and at best and at worst in North America, but here. Bottom line is that people need to realize that while climate change is important and automakers need to be building EVs, some of the EVs I've driven and some of the EVs you guys have driven were so awesome that it didn't matter how it was powered, you'd have bought the vehicle. Being an EV just is an advantage. And the automakers that win, I think, the next 10 years are the ones that say, oh, by the way, it's an EV, as opposed to, hey, look, it's an EV. You should buy it because it's an EV. No, that's not going to fly. And I give you a case in point. Nissan's new SUV, which T and I talked about when we were at a few months back, versus Volkswagen's ID4. Volkswagen had one job. I think they screwed it up. And I think Nissan got the hint. And also, probably the most wonderful American-made, I might add, EV crossover you can own, the Genesis GV70 electrified. Made in America, subject to the government rebates. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And climate change. But you would drive that thing even in the gasoline version. Being an EV just adds to the value. But nowhere on that vehicle does it say electric, EV. You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it. And having driven these vehicles, the power and the flow and the experience is so much better than a traditional powered vehicle. In 10 years, we're going to wonder why it took us so long.
Well, I think Genesis right out of the box got it right. I haven't found a Genesis product yet that I didn't like. And like you, whether it was an EV or gasoline engine, they just, to me, they hit the nail on the head with a sledgehammer. I mean, they didn't try to tap it into the wood. They drove that sucker in one blow.
Let me take you back to 2017 New York Auto Show. Genesis introduced their first GV concept. And it literally broke the show. If there was a vehicle that broke the show, that was the one. I'll never forget it. Everybody stopped and crowded when they introduced that thing. People came from all over the place. And it was pretty awesome.
Right. Any quick questions for Ken?
Favorite places to go get news? I'm going to mute myself again.
Oh, my goodness. I get news from so many different places. A lot of industry news that I get from everything from T&D World, which is an electric industry publication, to Market Watch, to the Wall Street Journal, to Automotive News. I get stuff from all over the place. So I don't think I have a favorite. Let's just say I'm well-rounded, and we'll leave it at that.
What made you want to go like a different route? Like you said, we all know a lot of people in the industry who write, but you seem to take it, like I said, you dive deeper in and you tell us things that we wouldn't normally think about. What made you want to start just go that route, basically?
I'm a curious person, and it's in my DNA. It's probably how I started in the industry. I was the guy, my first company of several, was helping people through the steps of buying a vehicle. So I was always consumer based as opposed to industry based. My background, actually, my 4-year degree is in accounting, actually. Really? So I'm not a journalist by training. I'm a journalist by vocation, actually, and kind of eased into this. So my look at the industry was different to start with. Now, don't get me wrong. I would love nothing better than to sit down and talk shop with a plant manager or a project manager at length, or an engineer, which I've done. But for my thing, I cover stuff that interests me. I want to know about a lot of different things. And I realized that there was nobody else in the industry or in media that was talking about this stuff. I mean, I talk about even the ugly underbelly of transportation, which is human trafficking, which nobody talks about in this country. And it needs to be talked about. I just did a piece. I was in studio yesterday. I just talked about the impact of mental health on the nation's big rig truck drivers on isolation on the road and what the industry is doing to deal with that. Because honestly, I want the fella driving 60 tons at 70 miles an hour next to me on the highway to be okay. I really want him to be okay, because if he's not okay, then I have a problem. And I don't want to have a problem at that speed, because you don't win in physics. So I talk about what's of interest to me. and I cover a wide berth because I think there's a lot of information out there that people need to know about, and people are not getting from the media sources that they typically go to today. And it's ironic because very often I'll find what I've just covered either in NPR after me or other outlets after I've already talked about it. And in some cases, months after I've talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So people who tune in to me get it first.
Mm-hmm. Well, great job. I love what you're doing. So
thank you, sis. Appreciate it. And I just love seeing you just live your best life down there in Miami.
Thank you very much.
Like, girl, please.
And where can your where is your channel broadcast? Where's your program broadcast?
Bigger question is, where isn't it? I've got two podcasts, the TechMobility podcast and TechMobility Topics. The difference between the two, they're both reformatted versions of my radio show, my weekly radio show. And one is topic based for people who are interested in a specific topic. The other one is the whole show, everything. So basically, anywhere you enjoy podcasts, either one, the TechMobility podcast or TechMobility Topic, you can find it. And I mean literally everywhere. I'm on at least 15 different platforms, and I think it's more than that. If you're lost, you can go to my website, the techmobility.show, and click there. That will get you there. I'm all over social media as well, like everybody these days, and that includes the social media site formerly known as Twitter, where I'm living my best life, as well as TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and everywhere. So it's not really hard. And if you want to find me on the radio, best place, go to my website, click down. You can find out which programs are on which stations. And I'm very proud to say that I just recently added the Minneapolis-St. Paul market. I'm on AM 950 up there, what they call Minnesota's Progressive Voice, or the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, they call it. And I may have a big announcement regarding the Seattle market pretty soon, I hope. I'm waiting to hear this week. They reached out. We'll see.
Very nice.
You mentioned TikTok. Are you looking to do the new TikTok Live?
You know, for me in live, I have so much content to repurpose that, you know, doing live is actually more of a challenge for me than an opportunity. You know, for me right now, it's just kind of me taking all of this, other than my board op once a week, where we go in and we spend 2 hours recording our minutes, recording our programming. It's pretty much me. So I said, right now, doing live, yeah, it's more work than I have bandwidth to handle.
You consider this work, being on our live show?
This, no, because I didn't have to prep for this. My shows, I got to do preparation and all sorts of stuff in background, because when I have somebody on, if I ever have you on, I will know more about you than you know about yourself. That's a promise. And ask Sue Mead, she'll tell you. I interviewed her at the Chicago Auto Show. And when she saw the video, she says, you know more about me than I know about myself. I did the same thing for Brian Armstead. I got a chance to interview both of them. And that's just kind of my thing. I feel if you're going to interview somebody, know about them, know a lot about them, know about them in a way that the public may not know them, and get an opportunity. Because then I think that is good content, because people are learning something. They're finding out something they didn't know.
Well, what is it about Ken that we don't know?
Oh my goodness. Well, that I could not do. I'm originally from Massachusetts, for one thing, and my family, I'm born and raised, and I couldn't do there what I'm doing out here in Iowa. There was no physical way I could do what I've managed to do out here the last 30 years where I grew up. There's no opportunity that would let me get in even inchwise there. Where I am right now is extremely supportive. I'm on the radio all over Iowa, including a 50,000 watt station. And fun fact, most of my radio stations that carry my long format program are far right conservative AM radio.
Really?
I don't hide and I don't apologize. They know who I am. I've only, of the maybe 22 or 23 stations I'm on, only 2 are progressive. And of those 2, I just made the announcement. I just added 1 here in the last month.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, this week, the Detroit Auto Show is going on, and it's been a while since auto shows have. They're trying to get back on track since COVID. What do you think the new look of auto shows will be since COVID?
I think the bigger question is, will there be a future for auto shows by the end of the decade? That's the bigger question. We've seen automakers, in Chicago's a perfect example. Chicago hid the fact that, oh, we have more tracks for you to experience stuff. The real story is we have way few automakers that came back. Way few. And the big question is, when you're looking at the kind of outlays they're looking at, SEMA they'll always have a presence. I think CES, they'll always be there, at least for the next 10 years. But are you going to do LA, New York, Chicago, and Detroit? I don't think so. I think you may pick one according to your market, but I think the days of full strength automakers representing those, what I call the big 4, I think those days are over. I can't see them justifying the expense when they have so many other ways to connect with their potential customers, clients, and they're using them. Whether they have their own events, which they can justify and they can kind of mold to the way they want to, or online virtual events where they found a lot of traction, or paying a social influencer to spend a week with their vehicle and film it 9 ways to Sunday and get their following. It's a lot more cost effective than auto shows are. And I think we're going to continue to see an erosion. I think of the big 4, I think at least 2 of them are in trouble. I really do.
You know, I've watched some of the virtual shows that the automakers have done, and I think their in-person auto shows are much better than what they've been able to do with virtual, which should be just the opposite because they have so much time to prepare for virtual where you can edit this and edit that.
Mhm.
Whereas with a live traditional show, you only get to do it once. You know, when the curtain opens, you're live. You can't change anything. I was just amazed at how, I'm not going to say poorly done, but that's what I mean. Some of the virtual presentations have been given.
But I think no, go ahead, Don.
I was gonna say, but there's something to that live thing, with stuff like that. It's like again, going back to when we were talking about when you mentioned COVID, and everything had to be virtually done there, whether it was a sporting event or a concert or something like that. And while yes, it's a functional way of doing stuff, it's not necessarily the best way of doing it for that whatever that product that you're trying to get out there. And I feel like these press releases, these reveals, all that kind of stuff, there's a bit of mystique to it, especially when it's live, that you get versus when it's just on a screen. And you kind of feed off of, or it can feed off of everybody that's in the presence of the product and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know, in the same manner, you can fall flat on your face also on a live broadcast or something like that, or not a live broadcast, but a live show. But there's definitely something to when you actually have physical presence in that same area as a new product is being revealed or what have you.
Let me speak some truth. Okay. We're speaking as automotive journalists that, we love to touch the sheet metal. We love to interact with the executives and ask the hard questions. But here's the thing. Auto shows, as much as we'd like to think they're all about us, they're not. And what they're finding out, and let me give you some examples. Tesla, who's never been to one. Rivian, who doesn't need to go to one. Lucid, the first Lucid I put my hands on was at the Mama Spring Rally. And the only Tesla I ever got to drive was because somebody from Tesla, personal vehicle, made it available at a Mama rally. What I think you're going to see is, while I don't disagree, there's some advantage to actually being there. I think they're looking at the hard money and saying, you know what? We can either do a virtual thing, or we can do an in-person thing, or we can just push this down to the dealer level, and you'll see more shows like what we got here in Des Moines. Would I go? No, because it doesn't offer me anything. But if you're a consumer wanting to touch a sheet metal, there's a lot more transactional benefit for the dealers and the manufacturers to do something uber local. I think you're going to see more uber local opportunities, whether they're manufacturer based or dealer based, and less of the big hoo-ha shows. I mean, look at you mentioned Detroit. Look at Detroit struggling to get back where they were, and they're not there. If any show should have had bounce back, it would be Detroit, and that's not happening. And you're not going to Detroit, okay, you're going to LA. LA seems to be the second place. If anyone's coming, they're coming to LA for a lot of different geographical and demographical reasons. New York becomes an issue because of expense and opportunity. So I think New York has a challenge. I think, as hard as it is for me to say this, I think Detroit's got a challenge. I think Chicago, because of its proximity to all those auto plants and the fact that it will be as much for people as the suppliers and the employees and a whole bunch of other things, Chicago may hang on longer. But yeah, in 10 years, I don't think the landscape of auto shows as we know it today and as we've known it even 10 years ago will be the same. I think you'll see a lot of smaller events. I think you'll see both dealer and manufacturer events smaller, more focused, more direct, and they will get better virtually. They just got to make up their minds of what they want to do and take it away from the ad agencies and actually get some leadership, because that's your problem. The ad agencies are trying to do it, which is why it's so disjointed. But I think that's where we're going.
I agree with you also. I think it's going to be probably just one main big show. And everything else is going to kind of fall off. You had mentioned how the local shows might still hang around there, but they actually were seeing the declines along with the Detroits and all of that kind of stuff. Like, for example, here in Atlanta, we are a dealer show, and it's a big one because Atlanta covers a big region, but manufacturers started dropping off at that show years ago, even prior to COVID. And then COVID was kind of like the final stake in the heart almost for the Atlanta show. And they've been struggling trying to build it back up again. But I think because of technology and them being able to, as you had mentioned, reach the masses with one production, that there isn't even a need for, again, the Chicagos and the Detroits and all that stuff. There may just be the one show. Who knows? It might be in one place all the time. It might travel from city to city, but there may just be one show that is the big one that, that all the manufacturers try to put something in there. Otherwise, there's no need for anybody else.
Let me tweak that point. When I say smaller shows, don't necessarily mean manufacturers. I think that the dealers that sponsor the show will actually bring the vehicles out of their inventory, because I'm saying it's transactional. People still want to experience the vehicles. And I think this is where the EV opportunity becomes, because a lot of people have no history with EVs and hybrids and things. So they're going to come out and be curious and said, what about this EV thing? There's a lot of people, I'll never give up my truck. But if they've ever experienced the Ford F-150 Lightning, or if they experienced some of these other trucks now coming to market, I think they'll change their minds. I think the manufacturers will continue to do some, and they may even throw some money towards the dealers to do something local, because it will still be cheaper from them actually being there. But I think those smaller local markets are going to be run, staffed, and supplied by the local dealers. I really think you're going to see a retrenchment or redeployment from the industry itself. It's going to be the dealers that have a transactional benefit from being able to, here's what we got, my inventory, you can buy this today, and experience it for yourself. I think the dealer is going to take a bigger role in that, rather than sponsor it and have the manufacturers come, like Des Moines. Our dealers sponsor, our dealers bring the cars.
That's very smart, and I think that is something that they should try to capitalize on. Because again, Atlanta show was primarily a dealer show.
Mm-hmm.
Manufacturers would come as well and showcase stuff, but it was primarily a dealer show. But dealers historically aren't cutting edge with or don't like change, and all of that. And so I think that's been one of the challenges, is that when something has to kind of evolve into something else or something new, something better, that's where dealers, I mean, they fought having online sales for so many years, even though the internet was a real thing. And then also the cost involved with it. They have to see that they actually can make money back from doing something like you have suggested if they invest in it, though. Because again, a dealer-run show means that the dealers have to cover the cost. And, again, just talking from our local show here in Atlanta, that's definitely been one of the challenges for that type of a show, where it's primarily, it wasn't a New York or LA or, Detroit type show where it was manufacturer driven. It was a dealer driven show. And it's been struggling. It's been struggling.
But that's where your brands come in. Your brands come in to help that evolution period, so that one, it maintains brand identity. But at the second point, you bring the dealer experience, the customer experience, that education piece all together. And then you start to cycle it together as it starts to evolve, because everyone has a vested interest in this working.
Yep, very true.
Like I mentioned earlier, the Detroit Auto Show is going on. I think it's Media Days. Yesterday and today, maybe. And
look at where we are.
Looking at some of the reviews of people talking about, journalists covering the show. I think the news out of Detroit is going to be that there was no EV introduction.
Here's a point. Media Days in Detroit, where maybe 10 years ago, none of us would have missed it. None of us are in Detroit right now.
Right.
That ought to say everything you need to know. None of us are in Detroit. None of us decided that being in Detroit was worth the financial opportunity to go and cover it. And all we're doing is echoing what a number of manufacturers have already voted. Because I know Detroit's light, Chicago was way light. Hard light, and not just from manufacturers. There was a lot of journalists that I knew weren't there. And that's saying everything. You got this chicken and the egg thing. If there's no news, why am I going? If there's no opportunity to break news, report news, make my money from reporting something that my client base, my customer base, my media company can't gain from, why am I there? Right now, for me, Chicago is still worth being there, but it's quickly getting to a point where even I have to start asking that question about Chicago, and I haven't missed a Chicago show in 26 years.
Great. Any final comments, questions for Ken? Any final comments from you, Ken?
You should know better than that.
Make them short.
He said, make it count.
Know better. Oh my goodness. I mean, the only thing that I can tell you, to Chris's point, and I'll leave it here. Chris, yeah, dealers are loath to change, but I was on a podcast earlier this week where we talked about the implementation of Chat GPT at the dealership. And it was a recent automotive news article about it. While there are some dealers that are forward thinking, and they're finding out that, yeah, I'm saving money and I'm improving service. And I think you're going to see a lot more jump on the bandwagon as they work that out.
Great.
When you
Ken,
coming
I
back?
want to thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. Our live presentation was
Ouch! Ouch!
Was of enough value that you showed up. So thank you for that.
Roosevelt,
great
Roosevelt,
information.
I'm glad you had me. Thank you.
Looking forward to seeing you in Chicago as usual, you and your wife.
Yes, absolutely. That's the plan. February. Mm-hmm.
I want to thank all of you for watching the live presentation. I want to thank those who watch the on demand. We will be podcasting this show as usual. Hopefully, it'll be up tomorrow, or at least by the weekend. As always, please buckle up, don't drink and drive. Buckle up, don't text and drive. Have a good weekend. Be safe. Thanks again, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thank you.